My name is Claire Dawson, and I was 34 years old the night I stood outside a cracked door at my own engagement party, holding a champagne flute I would never finish, listening to my best friend tell my fiancé that she couldn't keep doing this anymore. The hallway smelled like candle wax and the crab cakes still circulating on trays behind me. My mother's sapphire ring, the one that had sat in a velvet box in my dresser for 6 years before I finally had it resized to fit my hand, caught the light from the sconce above the door. I remember looking at it instead of looking through the gap in the door, like if I just stared at the ring long enough, the voices on the other side of it would stop meaning what they were starting to mean.
Jenna.
Look at me, Ryan said, in the low, patient voice he used when he wanted someone to calm down. It's one night. Nobody saw anything. That's not the point, Jenna said, and her voice cracked in a way I'd only heard once before, the week her father died. I can't stand in there and toast to this. I can't do it, Ryan. I did not gasp. I did not drop the glass. I have replayed that moment in my mind more times than I can count, and the thing I remember most clearly is that I set the champagne flute down on the little marble table in the hallway, very carefully so it wouldn't clink against the vase beside it. My hand was steadier than it had any right to be. I remember thinking, in the strange, detached way the mind protects itself in moments like that I could still hear the string quartet through the wall, still playing the same song they'd been playing when I walked away from my own party to find a bathroom, and that the song hadn't changed even though everything else just had. Through the gap in the door, I could see the edge of Jenna's blush pink dress, the one she'd insisted on for the party, the one she said made her feel like she wasn't overshadowing me on my own night, and Ryan's hand resting on her forearm in a way that had nothing hurried about it, nothing accidental. It was the stillness of it that told me more than anything either of them said. People who are doing something for the first time flinch. Neither of them flinched. What neither of them knew, standing in that back room while 80 of our closest friends and family ate crab cakes 12 feet away, was that 4 days earlier I had signed the final contract making Dawson and Cole the lead architecture firm on the Wren Street redevelopment, the largest commission of my career, the one I'd spent 3 years chasing, the one I had told exactly no one about yet, because I wanted my father to be the first to know. Nobody in that hallway had any idea what I was capable of building, or how quietly I was capable of building it. But let me back up. Let me tell you how I got here. I grew up in Millbrook, Ohio, the kind of town where the biggest news of any given year was whether the hardware store on Main Street would make it through another winter. My father was a contractor, and some of my earliest memories are of sitting in the cab of his truck on Saturday mornings, watching him walk the frame of a half-built house with a level in his hand, checking every corner like it owed him an explanation. I decided I wanted to be an architect the summer I was 11, after he let me hold the blueprints for a client's new porch, and I realized someone got to draw the thing before anyone got to build it. I put myself through 5 years of architecture school on scholarships and a part-time drafting job, and by the time I was 29 I had my license, 6 years of experience at 2 different firms, and a business plan I'd been quietly writing in the back of notebooks since I was 22. I started Dawson and Cole. There was never a Cole, incidentally. I liked the sound of 2 names better than one, and I have never once regretted the small I of it. Out of a converted 1-bedroom apartment with a card table for a desk and $11,000 in savings. For the first 3 years, I worked every Saturday and most Sundays. I ate cereal for dinner more nights than I care to admit. I said no to almost everything that wasn't work, including for a long stretch to dating. I met Ryan Doyle at a mutual friend's housewarming party 6 years ago, back when Dawson and Cole was still just me and one part-time drafter. He worked in commercial sales, had an easy laugh, and complimented my dress in a way that didn't feel like a line. He was, for a long time, exactly what I needed, someone who didn't ask me to be smaller so that he could feel bigger. He used to bring me coffee to the office on the mornings after a late client call. He remembered the names of my subcontractors. For years, that was enough, and it was real. I remember one night in our third year together, a bad one, when a general contractor on my first real commercial job tried to tell me, in front of his entire crew, that he'd feel more comfortable taking direction from whoever's actually in charge. I came home furious, half convinced I'd chosen the wrong life entirely, and Ryan didn't try to fix it or minimize it. He just sat with me on the kitchen floor, our backs against the cabinets, and let me talk until I was done being angry. Then he said, "You built something out of a card table and $11,000. That man built a grudge. I know which one of you is actually in charge." I held on to that sentence for years, long before he ever proposed. It's part of why the back room at that party cut as deep as it did. I wasn't just losing a fiancé. I was losing the version of him that had once known exactly what to say. Jenna Miles had been my best friend since our sophomore year of college, when we were assigned as roommates and discovered almost immediately that we were both the kind of people who alphabetized their spice racks. She was the maid of honor before Ryan had even formally proposed. We joked about it for years, the way best friends do, long before there was a wedding to actually plan. She'd been there for my father's heart scare 4 years ago, sitting with me in a hospital waiting room until 3 in the morning. She'd been there when Dawson and Cole almost folded in its second year, when I couldn't make payroll for my one part-time employee and cried into Jenna's shoulder in a parking lot outside the bank. I am telling you this not to make what happened hurt more in the retelling, but because it's the truth, and the truth is that betrayal rarely comes from strangers. It comes from the people who already know exactly where you keep your soft places. There is a ritual I have kept since the very first apartment I lived in alone, long before Ryan, long before the firm had a name. Every Sunday morning, before anything else, I water the fig tree. It started as one small plant on a windowsill above the card table, something my mother gave me the week I moved out, and it has grown apartment after apartment into an actual tree now, 5 feet tall, in a terracotta pot by the living room window. Ryan used to tease me about it. "You talk to that thing more than you talk to me before 10 a.m., but he also knew never to touch it, never to move it, never to water it himself even when he was trying to be helpful. It was mine. It still is. I tell you this because it matters later. Everything I'm telling you matters later." 6 months before the engagement party, things had started to feel different with Ryan, smaller, somehow, in a way I couldn't name at the time. He was distracted at dinner. He took calls in the stairwell instead of the living room. I told myself it was stress from a new sales territory at his firm. I told myself a lot of things. And then out of nowhere, he proposed. Not out of nowhere, exactly. We talked about marriage before, in the vague way people do, but the actual proposal came on a Tuesday, which felt significant to me at the time, a man deciding a regular Tuesday was worth remembering forever. He'd had the whole apartment lit with candles when I got home from a site visit, my favorite Thai food already laid out, and he got down on one knee in front of the fig tree, of all places, like he knew exactly where in that apartment I'd feel the most like myself. I cried. I said yes. For weeks after that, everything felt like it had been sanded smooth again. The distracted phone calls stopped, or at least I stopped noticing them, and we spent a long weekend up in Door County that felt like the best version of us. The version from 6 years ago. I remember thinking, quite clearly, standing on a pier looking out at Lake Michigan, that whatever strange, cold months had come before this were just a rough patch, the kind every long relationship survives. I was, for a little while, genuinely at peace.
I want to be honest about that.
I wasn't a woman who suspected everything and forgave nothing. I was a woman who wanted, very badly, for the good version of her life to be the true one. We spent that engagement season the way most couples do, tasting cakes we'd forget the flavor of within a week, touring a barn venue with exposed rafters that I privately critiqued the structural retrofit on the entire drive home, laughing about nothing in the car with the windows down. Jenna came dress shopping with me twice, cried both times, told the bridal consultant I looked like the most put-together bride she'd ever dressed, and helped me pick out the exact shade of blush for the bridesmaids' dresses she herself would be wearing. I remember standing on the little pedestal in front of the 3-way mirror, watching Jenna's face in the reflection as she watched mine, and thinking that I had never once, in 16 years of friendship, doubted a single expression that crossed it. That's the part one still turn over some nights. Not the lie itself, but how completely I trusted the face telling it. There was a Tuesday, maybe 6 weeks before the party, when Ryan came home late from what he said was a client dinner, and I noticed a faint trace of perfume on his collar that wasn't mine. I asked him about it, lightly, almost joking, and he laughed and said one of the account reps had hugged him goodbye in the parking lot, some floral thing she always wore. Everybody complained about it in the office. It was such a small, specific, plausible detail, an account rep, a floral perfume everyone supposedly complained about, that I let it go entirely. I didn't write it down. I didn't mention it to anyone. It would be months before I understood that the specificity of a lie is not the same thing as its truth, and that the best liars I would ever know were the ones who reached for detail instead of vagueness, because detail is what convinces you. Which is exactly why the back room at my own engagement party knocked the wind out of me in a way that a stranger's betrayal never could have.
It wasn't just Ryan.
It was the fact that I had let myself be at peace. I didn't confront them that night. I want to be clear about that, because I know it isn't the version of the story people expect. I did not throw open the door. I did not make a scene in front of 80 guests who had each brought a card and a wrapped gift and a genuine wish for my happiness. I picked the champagne flute back up, walked to the bathroom at the other end of the hall, ran the cold water over my wrists until my hands stopped shaking, and went back out to my own party and thanked people for coming. Ryan found me 20 minutes later, his tie slightly loosened, and kissed my temple and asked if I was having fun. I told him I was. That night, after the last guest left and Ryan fell asleep with his shoes still on, I sat at the kitchen table with my laptop and did the only thing I actually knew how to do when I didn't yet understand a structure. I started asking questions of the material in front of me, quietly, one at a time, the way I would with a site that didn't look right yet. The next morning I called my Aunt Ronnie. Ronnie is my father's younger sister, a retired claims investigator who spent 22 years reading people's stories out of receipts and phone records for an insurance company before she retired to a lake house 40 minutes outside of town. She is the only person in my family who has never once told me to calm down. "Tell me exactly what you heard," she said, word for word, "before you start telling me what you think it means." I told her. She was quiet for a long moment on the other end of the line. "Okay," she said finally. "Don't ask him anything yet. Don't ask her anything yet. You start writing down dates. Every strange night, every conference he mentioned, every time Jenna canceled plans with you in the last year. You write it down like you're building a file for someone else's case, not your own. It'll keep your hands steadier." "I don't know if I can be that clinical about this, Ronnie." "You don't have to feel clinical," she said. "You just have to act clinical for about 6 weeks. The feelings will still be there waiting for you afterward, I promise. But if you go in emotional first, they'll spend all their energy managing your emotions instead of answering for what they did. Emotion is the easiest thing in the world to redirect. Facts are not." She told me something else that stayed with me the whole time I was building that file. People who are telling the truth get impatient when you ask a second question. People who are lying get better at answering the first one every time you ask it again. Watch which one you're dealing with before you decide what you believe.
So I did.
Over the following 3 weeks, the file grew the way a set of blueprints grows. One small mark leading logically to the next, until a shape starts to emerge that you couldn't have seen from any single line. I found a hotel charge on a shared rewards account from 4 months earlier, $212 at a boutique in 90 minutes north of the city, on a weekend Ryan had told me was a work thing in Grand Rapids. I found a second one 2 months after that, at a different hotel, $630, the same weekend Jenna had told me she was getting away to clear her head after a rough breakup with a man named Colin that, I would later learn, had never actually existed. I found a receipt for a necklace, $480, from a small jeweler downtown on Ryan's card, in April, for days before my birthday. I never received a necklace for my birthday, that April or any other. I found, on a group chat Jenna and I had shared with 2 other college friends since sophomore year, a message from 8 months back, half visible in a screenshot our friend Priya had sent me without realizing what she was showing me, joking about something else entirely. Jenna at 11:47 p.m., writing, "I really can't keep doing this to Claire," and one of our friends replying, "Doing what?" And Jenna writing back, "Nothing, ignore me," wine talking, And then nothing else ever in that thread about it again. I found, buried 3 folders deep in a shared cloud drive Ryan and I had set up years earlier for tax documents, a single calendar invite he'd forgotten to delete, titled Only J, recurring every other Thursday for the last 11 months, with a location field that simply read, usual spot. I sat with that one for a long time. 11 months meant it had started well before the engagement, well before Door County, well before the perfume on his collar that I'd talked myself out of noticing. It meant the version of him kneeling in front of my fig tree with a ring in his hand had already, quietly, been living an entirely different Thursday than the one he let me believe in. I found a Venmo payment, $75, from Ryan to Jenna, memo line reading only a laughing emoji, dated the same week as her supposed breakup with a man named Colin. I texted Priya a screenshot at midnight with no caption at all, and she called me within 90 seconds. "Who is Colin?" she said, without even a hello. "There is no Colin," I said. "I don't think there ever was." Priya became the second person who knew. I told her everything, sitting in her kitchen with 2 untouched cups of coffee going cold between us, and she didn't say a single word until I was finished. Then she reached across the table, took my hand, and said, "Okay, what do you need from me?" Not "are you sure?" Not "have you talked to them?" Just, "what do you need?" I needed someone who would sit next to me while I made calls I didn't want to make alone. There was a night, about 5 weeks after the engagement party, when I nearly lost my nerve entirely. Ryan's phone had been sitting on the kitchen counter, unlocked, while he showered, and I stood over it for almost a full minute deciding whether to pick it up. My hand was actually reaching for it when I heard the water shut off, and I stepped back so fast I knocked my hip into the corner of the counter hard enough to bruise. I spent the rest of that night terrified he'd somehow known, watched, sensed it. Terrified that whatever I was building would collapse before I even understood its shape. 2 days later, it got worse. Jenna called me, out of nowhere, her voice bright and easy in a way that made my stomach drop before she'd even said anything real. "I feel like we haven't talked in forever," she said. "Can we get lunch this week? I miss you." I said yes, because saying no would have told her everything I knew before I was ready for her to know it. At lunch, she cried, actual tears, into a cloth napkin at a restaurant with cloth napkins, and told me she'd been struggling since her father's death anniversary, that she felt distant from everyone, that she was sorry if she'd seemed strange at the party, she'd had too much wine, and gotten emotional talking to Ryan about wedding jitters on his behalf. "Wedding jitters," I repeated. "He loves you so much, Claire," she said, reaching for my hand across the table. "He was just nervous. I was trying to help him talk it through. I probably shouldn't have pulled him away like that. It looked weird, I know." She kept talking about how close she and Ryan had always been, ever since I introduced them, how she sometimes felt like the built-in older sister neither of them had ever asked for, how she hated that a moment of her own grief had cast even the smallest shadow over the happiest chapter of my life. She was good. I want to say that plainly because it matters for understanding how long any of this took me to see clearly. Jenna had spent 16 years learning exactly which of my doubts to soothe and in what order, and she used every bit of that knowledge across one plate of untouched salmon. For one entire day, I let myself almost believe her. I want to be honest about that, too. I went home and sat with the file Ronnie had taught me to build and looked at every entry and thought, maybe I am building a case out of nothing. Maybe grief makes people strange. Maybe 2 hotel charges and a necklace and 1 drunk text really do add up to nothing at all. I actually opened an email to Ronnie that night, half-written, telling her I thought I'd overreacted, that I wanted to let it go and enjoy my engagement instead of turning it into an investigation. I never sent it. Something in me, the same part that reads a blueprint and knows, before the math confirms it, that a load-bearing wall is in the wrong place, wouldn't let me hit send. It was Priya, first, who caught me before I sent that email. She showed up at my apartment unannounced that same night, a bottle of wine in one hand and, tellingly, her own laptop in the other. "I know that look," she said, letting herself in before I'd even finished opening the door. "That's the look of a woman about to talk herself out of something true because someone cried at lunch." Maybe I overreacted. 2 hotel rooms and a necklace and 11 months on a calendar invite is not an overreaction, Claire. That's an entire timeline. She sat me down at the kitchen table, the same table, though I didn't know it yet, where I'd confront Ryan only weeks later, and opened her own laptop beside mine. We're not deleting that email tonight. We're going to sit here, and you're going to tell me, out loud one more time, exactly what you heard through that door. And then you're going to tell me whether Jenna's explanation actually accounted for all of it, or just the part that was easiest to explain. It didn't. Jenna's explanation accounted for exactly one hotel weekend, the drunk text, and nothing else. Not the necklace, not the second hotel, not the calendar invite she didn't even know I'd found yet. Priya made me say that gap out loud, twice, until I heard it the way she was hearing it. It was Ronnie, on the phone the following morning, who steadied what was left. "Sweetheart," she said, "a woman who's only worried about wedding jitters doesn't need to hide who she was talking wedding jitters with. You don't owe her the benefit of the doubt just because she cried at lunch. Crying is easy. The truth is in the dates." So, I went back to the dates. Before I tell you what happened next, comment below and let me know what city or country you're watching this from. I genuinely love seeing how far these stories end up traveling. And if you haven't already, go ahead and hit subscribe because tomorrow's story is an even wilder one. The dates, it turned out, told me everything Jenna's tears hadn't. The hotel in Grand Rapids. Ryan had told me it was a work trip with his regional team. I called the front desk myself, told them I was trying to confirm a reservation for a work retrospective and needed to know if it had been a group booking. The woman on the phone, without realizing what she was actually confirming, told me it had been booked as a single room, 1 king bed, 2 guests checking in, for 1 night only, the exact weekend Jenna had told me she was getting away to clear her head. The necklace. I drove to the jeweler downtown on a Tuesday afternoon, told the older man behind the counter that I was trying to track down a repair receipt for my fiancé's gift because the clasp had broken, gave Ryan's name, and watched the man pull up the sale without a flicker of suspicion. $480. A thin gold chain with a single amethyst pendant. Jenna's birthstone. I didn't cry when he told me that. I remember standing very still in that small shop, the bell over the door still faintly ringing from when I'd walked in, and thinking, with a strange, clean clarity, that I finally had what I needed. What I haven't told you yet is what I was carrying alongside all of this, quietly, in a separate part of my life that Ryan and Jenna knew almost nothing about. 3 years earlier, I had submitted a proposal, unsolicited, ambitious, probably a little arrogant for a firm my size, to the city's redevelopment office for the vacant Wren Street textile mill that had sat empty since I was in college. I'd walked that building alone on a Saturday morning with a flashlight and a notebook, measuring load capacities off memory and old permit records, sketching what it could become if anyone bothered to imagine past the boarded windows. For 3 years, that proposal moved through committees and site surveys and 2 separate developer pitches, each one a small, private hope I mentioned to almost no one because I have never liked discussing a building before its foundation is actually poured. I told Ryan early on that I was working on something interesting downtown. I never told him the size of it, the timeline of it, or the fact that the final contract, the one making Dawson and Cole the lead architecture firm on record, not a subcontractor, not a consultant, but the firm whose name would sit on the plaque, was moving toward a signature that same spring. I wanted it to be a surprise for my father, who had driven past that mill 100 times over the years and once told me, half joking, that somebody ought to save it before the city finally tore it down. I never once imagined it would end up meaning something entirely different, that the same quiet, private ambition that had nothing to do with either of them would become the ground I was standing on when everything else gave way. I signed the final contract on a Tuesday afternoon, 4 days before my own engagement party, in a conference room with a developer's attorney and a stack of paper an inch thick. I remember driving home afterward with the windows down, already composing, in my head, exactly how I'd tell my father, probably over dinner, probably with the framed permit drawing I'd already had made as a surprise for his birthday. I had no idea that Tuesday, that 4 days later I would be standing outside a cracked door instead, learning a very different kind of truth about what people do when they think no one's paying attention. I called a lawyer the next morning, Not a divorce lawyer, since we weren't yet married, but a family law attorney a colleague had used during her own broken engagement to understand exactly what needed protecting before I said a single word to either of them. Her office was on the 14th floor of a building I'd actually helped renovate the lobby of 2 years earlier, which felt like a strange, small joke the universe was playing on me, that I'd once drawn the very floor plan I was now sitting inside, waiting to be told how to dismantle my own life without losing what I'd built. "The good news," she said, flipping through the folder I'd brought her, "is that you were careful before you even knew you needed to be. The wedding account is a shared account, but the deposit history shows the bulk of the funding came from your business, which matters. The ring is legally considered a conditional gift in this state. If the marriage doesn't happen, it typically reverts to the giver, but that cuts both ways, so we'll want that handled cleanly, not emotionally. And the lease on the new apartment. Has anyone signed beyond the application?" "Just the application fee." "Good. Then that's the easiest thread to pull first." She looked up at me over her reading glasses. "I want to say one more thing, and then we'll get to the paperwork. A lot of women come in here already halfway convinced they did something to deserve an explanation before they're allowed to protect themselves. You don't owe anyone an explanation for closing an account with your own name on it. You get to do that quietly, calmly, and completely, and you don't need his permission or his understanding to do it." I learned that afternoon that the deposit on the venue, the money already spent on the caterer, the ring itself, all of it needed a plan before it needed an audience. Over the following 2 weeks, while Ryan told me he loved me over breakfast and Jenna texted "miss you" like nothing in the world had changed, I did the quiet, unglamorous work of protecting what was mine. I removed my name, carefully, methodically, with the help of that attorney, from the small joint account we'd opened for wedding expenses, transferring my contributed portion back into an account only I could access. I called the venue and confirmed, in writing, that the deposit had been paid entirely from Dawson and Cole's business account, meaning it was mine to redirect if the event never took place as planned. I quietly gave notice on the lease for the larger apartment Ryan and I had signed for a married life, move that was set to begin in 2 months, before either of us had put down a cent beyond the application fee. I did not scream. I did not throw anything. The night I finally sat Ryan down at our kitchen table, the same table where I'd first opened my laptop and started writing dates, I set a folder down in front of him instead of my voice. "I know about the hotel in April," I said. "I know about the one in June. I know about the necklace. I know about the calendar invite you never bothered to delete, and I know it started 11 months ago, which means it started before you ever got down on one knee in front of my fig tree." He opened his mouth, and I watched, almost from a distance, as he tried 3 different expressions before landing on anger, because anger was easier than the truth. "You've been going through my things? Spying on me?" "I've been protecting myself," I said. "There's a difference. And I'm not interested in whether you think it's fair. I'm interested in you telling me the truth, once out loud, so I know I'm not insane." He was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working like he was chewing on which version of the story to give me. "It didn't mean what you think it means," he finally said. "It was never going to be. It wasn't supposed to turn into anything real. It just kept happening. For 11 months. I love you, Claire. That never stopped being true. I believe that you believe that," I said, and I remember being surprised by how level my own voice sounded, like it belonged to someone standing a few feet outside my body. "But it doesn't change anything I'm about to do." "What does that mean?" "It means I already talked to a lawyer. It means your name's already off the wedding account. It means the venue knows the deposit was paid for my business, not our engagement, so it's not disappearing with you. It means I need you out of this apartment by the end of next week." I slid the folder an inch closer to him on the table, not as a threat, just so he'd understand there was nothing left to argue with. "I'm not asking you to explain yourself further. I already have everything I need." He stared at the folder like it might rearrange itself into a different answer if he looked at it long enough. "You planned all of this," he said finally, quieter now, something almost like awe under the anger. "This whole time, while I thought you didn't know, I've been planning buildings since I was 22, I said. This wasn't any harder. I did not raise my voice once. I remember that most of all, How strange it felt to be entirely calm while something that had taken 6 years to build came apart in real time on the other side of a kitchen table. I picked up the folder when I was done, put it back in my bag, and told him one more time when I needed him out. I slept in the guest room that night, and every night after, until he left. He tried, twice more, to explain, a text at 1 a.m. the first night, a longer one 2 days later about how none of it had been about me not being enough, and I read both messages once, calmly, and did not answer either. Jenna called 4 times in the 2 days after Ryan moved out. I didn't answer any of them. On the 5th call, she left a voicemail, her voice shaking in a way that, for the first time, sounded less like performance and more like fear. Claire, please. I know you probably hate me. I need you to know it wasn't what you think, not at first, and then it was too late to say anything and I was scared, and I know that's not an excuse, I know. I deleted it before she finished. Some doors don't need to be reopened just because someone's still knocking. I did tell my mother the truth and my father and Priya, who already knew everything. I did not tell most of our shared friend group the details, not out of protectiveness toward Ryan or Jenna, but because I genuinely did not want to spend the following 6 months narrating my own humiliation at every dinner party. I let the engagement quietly end the way most private things end, through absence, not announcement. People noticed. People asked. I said simply, it didn't work out, and let that be the whole story for a while. It would not, however, stay the whole story for very long because 5 months after Ryan moved out, Dawson and Cole was set to unveil the completed first phase of the Wren Street redevelopment, the very project I'd signed 4 days before that engagement party, the one I'd wanted to surprise my father with, the one nobody at that party had known was mine. Jenna called 4 times in the 2 days after Ryan moved out. I didn't answer any of them. On the 5th call, she left a voicemail, her voice shaking in a way that, for the first time, sounded less like performance and more like fear. Claire, please. I know you probably hate me. I need you to know it wasn't what you think, not at first, and then it was too late to say anything and I was scared, and I know that's not an excuse, I know. I deleted it before she finished. Some doors don't need to be reopened just because someone's still knocking. I did tell my mother the truth and my father and Priya, who already knew everything. I did not tell most of our shared friend group the details, not out of protectiveness toward Ryan or Jenna, but because I genuinely did not want to spend the following 6 months narrating my own humiliation at every dinner party. I let the engagement quietly end the way most private things end, through absence, not announcement. People noticed.
People asked.
I said simply, it didn't work out, and let that be the whole story for a while. It would not, however, stay the whole story for very long because 5 months after Ryan moved out, Dawson and Cole was set to unveil the completed first phase of the Wren Street redevelopment, the very project I'd signed 4 days before that engagement party, the one I'd wanted to surprise my father with, the one nobody at that party had known was mine. The unveiling was held at the building itself, a converted textile mill turned mixed-use development, exposed brick and reclaimed steel beams and floor-to-ceiling glass, the kind of project that takes over a firm's entire identity for 3 years and then, if you did it right, becomes the reason people start returning your calls faster. String lights had been hung along the exposed ceiling joists at the developer's insistence, and standing underneath them that evening, looking up at the old timber beams I'd fought 2 separate contractors to preserve instead of tear out, I felt something settle in my chest that had nothing to do with Ryan at all, a feeling closer to the one I'd had as an 11-year-old holding blueprints for the first time, watching something exist on paper before it existed anywhere else. The city councilwoman was there. 2 local news outlets sent cameras. My father stood near the back with his hands in his pockets, the way he always stands at things he's secretly proud of, wearing the same tie he'd worn to my college graduation, and I saw him actually wipe his eyes when the developer, at the microphone, said my name and the name of my firm and called it one of the most significant redevelopment stories the city has seen in a decade. I had not invited Ryan. I had, without quite planning it, invited most of the same people who had been at that engagement party 10 months earlier, colleagues, mutual friends, my parents, Priya, even a few of Ryan's old co-workers who I genuinely liked and hadn't wanted to lose simply because he no longer belonged in my life. What I had not accounted for was that one of those co-workers would mention the event, casually to Ryan, and that Ryan, perhaps out of curiosity, perhaps out of some need to see for himself what exactly he'd walked away from, would show up uninvited, with Jenna on his arm. I saw them come in through the glass doors at the back of the room while the councilwoman was still speaking. I did not stop breathing. I did not knock over a glass. I finished listening to the introduction, walked up when it was my turn, and gave the same remarks I'd rehearsed in the mirror 3 times that morning, about the mill's history, about the families who'd worked its floors for 80 years before it closed, about what it means to build something that outlasts the reasons you first wanted to build it. It was only afterward, during the reception, glass of wine in hand, that Ryan approached me near the windows overlooking the river. I watched him cross the room and felt none of the old instinct to make things easier for him. "I didn't know," he said, quietly, gesturing vaguely at the room, at the exposed beams, at the small brass plaque already mounted near the entrance with Dawson and Cole's name on it. "About any of this. The whole time we were together, I had no idea you were working on something this big." "I know," I said. "That was sort of the point for a while. I wanted my father to be the first to know, not the party." "You never said a word. Not once." "You weren't the only one keeping things quiet," I said, and I watched that land on him exactly the way I meant it to. He looked, for a moment, genuinely stricken, not performing anything, just quietly absorbing the size of what he'd walked out on, in front of a room that now included the councilwoman, 2 reporters, his own former co-workers, and my father, who had chosen that exact moment to appear at my elbow with 2 glasses of champagne, one of which he handed directly to me without acknowledging Ryan at all. "Everything all right over here?" my father asked, in the mild, immovable tone he uses with contractors who've shown up late to a job site. "We were just leaving," Ryan said quickly, and I noticed, for the first time all evening, that his voice had lost the easy confidence I used to find so reassuring. Jenna had been hovering near the bar the entire evening and never came within 20 feet of me. I caught her eye once, across the room, and she looked away first, something she had never once done in 16 years of friendship, not even the day I told her I thought her college boyfriend was wrong for her. I don't know what she and Ryan said to each other in the car on the way home. I never asked. Priya, standing beside me with her own glass of wine as the 2 of them made their way toward the doors, watched them leave and said, simply, "Well, that was its own kind of ending, wasn't it?"
It was.
It has been almost 2 years now since that night by the mill's windows. I still live alone in a different apartment than the one Ryan and I shared, on the top floor of a building 3 blocks from the office. The fig tree came with me. It's over 6 feet now, its top leaves nearly brushing the ceiling, and it survived the move far better than I expected any living thing tied to that chapter of my life to survive. Every Sunday morning, before anything else, I still water it. I still stand there in the quiet with a cup of coffee going lukewarm in my other hand, checking its leaves the way my father used to check a level against a doorframe, making sure everything is still standing the way it's supposed to. Some mornings I notice a new leaf unfurling near the top, pale green and still curled tight, and I think about how long it takes anything worth having to actually finish growing. Dawson and Cole has grown too. 5 employees now instead of 1, a second commission underway on the other side of the river, a framed photograph of the mill's ribbon cutting hanging in the front hallway of the office, right where clients see it first. I hired my first full-time drafter 8 months ago, a serious 24-year-old named Megan who reminds me, more than I've told her, of myself at that age, the same habit of double-checking a measurement 3 times before trusting it. My father asks about the firm every time we talk, proud in the particular quiet way he's always been proud, and I think that's the version of pride I actually wanted all along. Not applause in a crowded room, just my father in the back, wiping his eyes without saying anything about it. I ran into Jenna exactly once, about a year after the mill's unveiling, in the parking lot of a grocery store on the north side of town. She looked older than I remembered, tired in a way that had nothing to do with lighting. She started to say my name, and I simply nodded once, not cruelly, just finally, and kept walking to my car. I heard, secondhand, through Priya, through the same friend group that had once shared that late-night text thread, that she and Ryan hadn't lasted much past that first winter without me in the picture to make their arrangement feel like a secret worth keeping. I didn't feel triumphant when I heard it. I mostly just felt like a chapter had quietly closed itself, the way chapters do when nobody's left to keep reading them. I dated, eventually, a little. Nothing that's become permanent yet, and I've stopped needing it to be. I know now what peace is supposed to feel like when it isn't a performance, when it isn't candles arranged just so in an apartment, time to distract from 6 months of distance. Real peace, it turns out, feels a lot quieter than that. It feels like Sunday mornings. It feels like watching something you built with your own hands get taller every year, whether or not anyone else was ever watching it grow. Some nights, closing up the office alone, I stop in front of that framed photograph in the hallway. The ribbon cutting, the councilwoman's arm around my shoulder, my father half cut off at the edge of the frame because he'd stepped back to let me stand at the center of it. And I think about the version of me who once stood outside a cracked door holding a champagne flute, certain that everything she'd built was about to be taken from her. I wish I could tell her, if only for a moment, that the thing she was building had never actually belonged to the people in that back room.
It never needed their permission to keep standing. I was real the whole time.
That's enough.